porn industry. It's a $96 billion industry. There's sex trafficking, there's issues with minors. Everyone who's creating content in that industry is miserable. Basically, all of social media is just an advertisement for pornography. My own struggle with pornography dated back to high school. It's like the harder I tried to stop it, the worse it got. And the worse it got, the more shame I felt about myself. And it was kind of created this double life where I felt like if only people knew the real me and like how, gross I am and how unworthy I am. What I see, man, is it just erodes a lot of these guys' sense of like purpose and how they see themselves. Like even if they don't feel like it's a big issue, it creates this cycle. I think it feeds depression, it feeds anxiety. It's a difficult vice to overcome. It's not an easy one. And anecdotally, we have people show up in our community all the time that are like, I kicked alcohol, I kicked this, I kicked that. This thing is damn difficult. We talked about it's literally everywhere.
How much of a problem is this amongst women?
No, it's a great question.
Chandler Rogers, welcome to Real Talk with Zuby. How you doing?
Thanks so much, Zuby. I'm doing great.
So, Chandler, we're going to go into a interesting and maybe a bit of a peculiar topic for some people today. But first questions first, what is Relay and why did you start it?
Yeah, Relay is an app that helps guys quit pornography and be able to become more healthy, whole versions of themselves. Started the app about 5 years ago with a buddy from college. I never planned on working something like this topic, but I had a background in tech and worked for a couple of startups and ultimately just felt passionate about trying to help do some good. I dealt with my own struggle with pornography growing up, and it was something that took me years to really try to get a handle on. And the key for me was really stepping out of isolation and into a group, into connection. And that was kind of what led to creating the app later on. Relay was we wanted to make it easier for people to find a group with a lower barrier where you could stay anonymous, and that's what the app does.
Okay, well, tell me a little bit about the journey to getting here, because obviously there's a backstory. What you do is not like a sort of standard thing that people do for a living, right? So what's the backstory there of what made you want to create this? Just tell me the story.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, I mean, my own struggle with pornography dated back to high school. I think I was a sophomore in high school when I first stumbled upon, really it was when Instagram was becoming a big thing. I didn't go looking for it. A lot of people, it's like, a cousin showed me on the bus or at a sleepover or found an old magazine, of my uncle. And for me, it was none of those. It was something that we actually talked about in our home growing up. So I grew up in a Christian household. I was the oldest of 5 kids. We moved around a lot too, and I always felt kind of this sense of responsibility to be a good kid. And I think on the outside, who Chandler was, like whether it was school or sports, I ran track and cross country, played the piano. Like I could set my mind to something and do pretty well. Like I valued achievement and performance for better or worse. And then when pornography and masturbation kind of crept in, at first it wasn't like I was super aware of what was going on. It was slowly over the course of a couple years, honestly. And by the time I realized I want to change this, it's become a habit that it just didn't feel right for me. It's like the harder I tried to stop it, the worse it got. And the worse it got, the more shame I felt about myself. And it was kind of created this double life where I felt like if only people knew the real me and like how, gross I am and how unworthy I am, like, they'd see me differently. And, I had a desire to like serve in my church capacity, and help with the youth group that I was a part of. And it just created a lot of just inner conflict. And so never did I have a thought through this of like, I want to help other people with this. I want to be a therapist, like none of that. I was always drawn towards business. And so when I was in college, I had a mentor give me an opportunity to come work for his startup. He had exited a few companies before and was like, tech is the way to go, man. You should be like moving in this direction. And so, yeah, quite frankly, it was just a series of events where I was working at my first startup, and it was actually in the moving industry where I had moved around 7 times and felt kind of passionate about it. It was exciting for me to figure out how to make moving less frustrating and stressful for people. Oftentimes like your stuff gets broken and like it's a ton of money. It takes a lot of time. It's usually connected to a stressful time of life. And so I enjoyed that startup. I was there for 2 years, and that was really my first kind of part of my career. But kind of as I got deeper into that, I just kept having this thought in the back of my mind of like, I don't want to be here forever. And I think I do want to build something of my own, build something that can solve a problem that I think matters. And I kept thinking about pornography being this vice that is so common and yet so little talked about and underaddressed in terms of options and resources for help. And so, for me, I ended up having to go to a therapist group that was like $70 a week. I had to show up on Zoom, turn my camera on. I was scared, man. I didn't know who was going to be on the other side of that call. I felt like Chandler's the type of person I would never have to go to something like this. But when I got to that point, I was so surprised at how normal everyone else in that group environment was, how like they had goals and they had normal lives and relationships and I had newly left the house. So I was maybe like 18, 19 years old. And I think it just solidified this passion that stuck with me as I got into my career and was working at this other startup that we're not meant to deal with these difficult, often shameful things alone, and that there's power in stepping into connection and into community. And really what sparked the Relay specifically was I'd heard a TED Talk by Johann Hari where he says that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's actually connection. And I had the chance through a class actually my senior year to get credit to build an app. And so I pitched my friend. I was like, dude, it just kind of came to me late at night. I'm like, I think there needs to be an easier way to go from isolation with this type of an issue, which so many guys deal with, and get into connection. So into a group, into a tight-knit accountability environment that isn't shameful. And that's what really sparked Relay. It was a combination of just my personal story, seeing a ton of guys that I was open with, and I was like, is this something you deal with? And almost everyone says yes. Yeah. And then I'm like, have you ever, like, what have you tried to do? And it's like basically white knuckling alone. I'm like, man, there has to be a better way.
For you personally, was there a time where you particularly realized or felt like, okay, this is an addiction. This is really a problem? Because I think when it comes to this particular vice, it's so common and it's so ubiquitous at this point. And it's also so hidden. And for obvious reasons, people don't really like talk about it. But we also live in a culture where, a lot of people don't deem it a problem at all, right? It's not something that is even universally considered, oh, that's
Agreed.
Morally bad, or that's shameful, or that's something you need to hide, or so on. In fact, a lot of the societal messaging, particularly over the last couple decades, which, your entire life and even before you were born, it's just been so normalized and mainstreamed and even promoted and celebrated. So I'm just wondering if there was I'm kind of wondering where maybe two things, like where the conviction came from. You've already touched on faith-based background. I think that's probably an important part of it, but you can tell me otherwise. And then also just the moment of like, you know what, this is a problem. This is something that's having a negative impact on my life internally, externally. Was there a particular moment, or was it just from early on you were just like, you know what, like, I know this isn't something I should be doing?
No, it's a great question. There was that faith piece. Like I, had this moral understanding or belief that this wasn't good. And I think that is where it started. But I think where I really cared and where I think it started to bother me on a very deep level, like it affected my identity and the way I saw myself, was the inability to stop. And there is not actually a clinical consensus over, is this officially an addiction? Which I actually think is a little wild, because like gambling is officially in the DSM as like a diagnosable disorder addiction, but pornography isn't, at least in the U.S. In the international version of that for psychologists, it is recognized as compulsive sexual behavior. So it's interesting because people typically look at the addiction definition, and I'm not a neuroscientist or a researcher, but I associate it with a lot of those folks in building Relay. you typically are looking at, well, how much quantity defines the addiction, or how does it affect the brain, and chemically, how does it alter the brain? But for me, it was like very simple. It was like, I can't stop. And the harder I tried to stop, it was more elusive. Again, coming from somebody that I felt like I could do whatever I wanted to do. And maybe that was probably rooted in some pride, to be totally honest. But like, it really attacked kind of this core identity of like, why can't I figure this out? Like, is there something wrong or broken with me? But I think the interesting thing I've seen about this too is this particular vice, this outlet often is something that it's not just, who you would think about with addiction, maybe stereotypically. Like most of these people have, the normal jobs, normal lives. They're good people for the, like, this doesn't define whether they're good or not, but just to be clear, like, they're not homeless on the side of the street, and they can't stop having sex with prostitutes most of the time. That's not usually the persona. It's often high-performing executives or, achievers in various professions. That's like, dealing with stress, dealing with loneliness, dealing with rejection. We often were exposed as teenagers. So I think part of this too is just the hyper accessibility of it is what defines it for me. It's less of like what exactly is pornography and what isn't, and what's good for you and what isn't. I don't necessarily, I don't go out there trying to persuade everyone that they should get off of this stuff. But if you get to a point where you realize, man, this is taking time from me, it's affecting my relationship, so we can get into that, because I wasn't in a relationship at the time. But for a lot of guys, it's like breaking trust with their significant other, and that's like the indicator of whether you think it's a problem or not. If it's pushing me away from real connection and real intimacy in my real relationship to pixels on a screen, I don't see how that can be really good in most cases.
Yeah. How old are you, Chandler?
I'm 28.
It's really interesting. The reason why I ask that is because, I mean, you're 11 years younger than me, which in some ways, in my mind anyway, doesn't sound like that much. But when we think about the digital revolution and the introduction of smartphones and social media and broadband and mobile internet, our experience, say, between the ages of 10 and 20 is probably quite radically different. Just with that 10-year age gap, right? So by the time that smartphones and social media and internet being all over the place and everyone walking about with it in their pocket, I was already an adult. So yes, when I was a teenager, we had mobile phones, we had dumb phones, right? We had Nokias and Blackberries and Sony Ericssons and so on. But
I do remember a BlackBerry, I'll tell you that.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, even those had started to have internet access, right? But I remember when a mobile phone was really just a phone. It wasn't a little portable computer and camera and video camera and internet browsing device that everyone's walking around with all the time. So, for me personally, I mean, I went to boarding school at the age of 11 years old. So I grew up in Saudi Arabia, but then I went to boarding school in England. And I remember in school, you can imagine, all boys school full of kids from the age of like 7 to 12. And then my next school was like 13 to 18. And most people are boarders. Most people's families are in another country. And obviously, like, obviously people get exposed to stuff, right? But even then it was like, it was kind of rare. Like it had to be sought after. Right. Or,
right.
Or maybe someone sent
like somewhat intentional.
Yeah. Or someone sent you like a link to something. But even then it's like one photo, or it's like one video. It's not like some gigantic infinite catalog of like, like now you cannot even be looking for it. Right.
Oh, it's just what the algorithm feeds you. Right.
Or it's very borderline. Right. Like you brought up Instagram. Like there's so much stuff on Instagram that is like borderline. But then if you're on X, or the app formerly known as Twitter, like that's the big social media platform where it's like it's all out there, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's like a really significant shift. You kind of mentioned it before that in the past, right? Someone might have to like seek out a magazine or go to some shady DVD store or like, get some weird subscription or something that they're worried might show up on a credit card bill. Whereas now it's just like it's worryingly accessible. It's just like type in like a couple of, boom, like literally within seconds, everyone just has access to everything. And I think that's part of the reason why, like, I don't know the stats, maybe you know some numbers, but I would imagine that for men in particular around your age and younger, it's just like, I don't know, like, I don't even know how it would be avoided, how it would be totally avoided, even if you were trying to. And that's kind of scary.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. Like even from a parenting perspective, it totally changes the narrative. Because when I told my mom, which most guys are not comfortable telling their mom. So I was a really good kid. I was like, my mom came and asked me, "Hey, is this something you've ever come across?" And I was like, "Yeah, actually." And I've been trying to make a change, and it's like impossible. And she blamed herself so much. She's like, "What should I have done differently to prevent this?" And I kind of, even at that age, I understood. I'm like, I don't think you really could have. It wasn't like. It wasn't like something just sprung upon me, like some hardcore pornographic site. It was just kind of this, slow drip of sexualized content from every angle and natural curiosity, right? But yeah, I mean, I've got a 2-year-old son now, and it makes me think, and even just like 5-6 years from now, he'll be 7-8 years old. Kids are getting exposed that young through so many different ways. It's on video game platforms, like so many different angles. And then the recent announcement with ChatGPT, you see that allowing people to create their own erotica?
I saw a headline, but explain it more.
So Sam Altman came out and said that OpenAI is going to, I think under their policy, they call it treat adults like adults. And essentially that's code for let you create your own pornography. And we don't know all the details of what this is going to look like. So I don't want to report anything that may not fully be true, but they intend to, or they've stated that they intend to allow their AI platforms to be used for adult content purposes. And my interpretation of this is obviously the porn industry. So it's a $96 billion industry. It makes up a huge percentage of the internet. As OpenAI is stealing market share from Google in the search business, it's only logical in my mind that they see this opportunity where adult content dominates so much of what Google search has typically been, and that there's probably a lot of opportunity there from a business perspective. So they're moving in that direction, and the worrisome part is, again, what does that do to the way that kids younger and younger get exposed while their brains are still developing? Like, we know the prefrontal cortex doesn't stop developing until around 25 years old. I was exposed later than most. I was like 14, maybe, when I first was really exposed to true pornography. And so I'm not necessarily anti-ChatGPT or anything like that, but it's just something to think about. And also, like, a lot of these apps are kind of building off of these AI platforms like ChatGPT to create these AI girlfriends. And I mean, Elon's posted a lot about Grok and these like sexualized anime characters. And bro, like, I laugh too. I'm like,
I personally
this is the stupidest
personally
thing.
got him to delete one of those posts, so I'm quite proud of that.
No way. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, good, because I mean, we're trying to wage a war too. I just want to get a reply from him on X.
Yeah.
But dude, it's like I actually downloaded one of these apps the other day because I was just curious. Like I think the leading AI boyfriend girlfriend app has like 30 million downloads or something like that. Like, it's astronomical. And I like actually went into the experience just this last week, and I was shocked that they market it like very subtly. Like, it's not marketed as this overt sexualized stuff. And this, I won't name the specific app, but it wasn't Grok. It wasn't the stuff on X. It was just one of these other apps. And they're all using ChatGPT under the hood, so you can essentially interact with these different characters. And dude, it's like they're programmed within like 10 seconds. It started trying to turn it sexual, like in this conversation. And I was like blown away and just kind of like looking at what it could do. It created a whole new level of worry in my mind, because this isn't just about porn, really. I think this is about where are we as a society turning for real connection. We're moving away from this traditionally, like, you have to work for a relationship. Relationships are not easy. A marriage isn't easy. Having a closeness is really at the root of intimacy, is scary. You got to work through differences. You got to handle and tension. You got to hold space for uncomfortable emotion. And I think we're in this like dopamine, commoditized era. Dr. Anna Lemke has talked a lot about this in her book, Dopamine Nation. It's that our brains are just seeking these shorter, quicker outlets to get pleasure, to be satisfied, to escape pain, to numb discomfort, to be seen and to be loved. And as we replace that with whether it's scrolling TikTok or Pornhub or these AI platforms, I think the real worry is like, what are we replacing? What need are we really truly filling in our hearts that we're not learning the capacity to meet as mature human beings? And how does that drive us away from relationship? That's what worries me.
A word you've used quite a few times throughout the conversation is connection. So talk to me more about the link between isolation and porn usage and connection and the opposite.
If you think about other types of addictions, it's really hard to conceal. Like you have to go to a lot greater lengths to conceal a drinking habit, to completely keep that isolated, or heroin, or pick your drug of choice. It's really hard. There's smell, there's objects, there's often money involved, and you can spend money on porn, but like 95% of people don't. And so you think about just what makes porn unique is the hyper accessibility, like we talked about. It's literally everywhere. And there's all these inroads to it. You don't have to go searching for it. So accessible, it's hyper anonymous. Like nobody has to know, as long as you know how to like clear your search history. Like it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. That's it. And then it's affordable, right? It's like totally free. And so what that means is all I have to do is go alone, whether it's to the bathroom or to my room or to my car. And it's something that for the most part, unless it becomes really egregious, it's not that hard to hide it. And so, isolation, I think what it breeds is this connection in the brain where if I feel something that makes me uncomfortable, I can go and retreat or escape, or whatever the word is. It's probably different for everyone in your own unique story. But my brain learns I can go here and it's alone, and I can feel better. And what that teaches my brain is that I can disconnect rather than leaning into whatever I'm feeling or whatever's happening in my real life, whether it's my marriage, my job, my, whatever might be creating stress or emotion in my life. I can go this way and I can meet my own needs easier, right? Because it's hard to get those needs met in healthy, mature relationships. Emotionally, I'm not just talking about sexual needs. So I've been married for 5 years, and it's like way easier for me to just go scroll X and like feel happy. And not like, let's not even make it about porn. It's just like, let me go like look up some college football stuff and like watch some quick clips. And it's not like that's inherently bad, but it's like, how often am I choosing to do that instead of choosing to like try to connect or have some meaningful conversation with my wife at the end of a long day? It's so easy to just not, and like falling into, I think a lot of couples fall into this pattern, whether it's porn or anything else, of just like, it's easier to just go by myself. So how does isolation kind of perpetuate this? I think it's bred in isolation. I think we want to keep when we want to keep secrets, right? It's really hard to make changes. And so our brain wants to protect, this part that, if anyone knew, what would they think of me? So I don't share about it. I keep it silent. For people that feel shame about it, right? The shame makes it worse. So it makes me want to be more hidden, more isolated, more alone. And that's why really to flip the script, it has to be like, we have to interject and create an opportunity to get connected in a different way.
Yeah, I hear that. Having worked in this space for a while and dealing with individuals and communities of people who are trying to break this habit or addiction, however someone wants to put it, what in your experience and observation of the different people that you've dealt with, what is it? This might sound like an odd question, because the answer will be really obvious to some people, but I think very non-obvious to others, depending on who is listening and what position they're coming from. But what is the harm? What is the actual problem? So with lots of those other things you mentioned, right, like drug addictions, smoking, alcoholism, all those type of things, I think it's quite obvious in terms of, physical ramifications and health ramifications, and those are things that can quite literally kill you, right? As far as I'm aware, nobody has ever died directly. About,
we could get into crazy stories.
I was going to say there's probably some story out there which I probably don't even want to know.
Yeah, but it's not common. Yeah,
but yeah, like why? Obviously, if you're coming from a position of faith, then obviously it's a moral issue. But for somebody who's not, why is it a problem? Why is it wrong?
Yeah.
Why would they feel convicted?
It's a very valid question. When I started Relay, I was skeptical. So we went and we raised some money from investors. And this was one of the biggest questions I got asked is, do people who are not faith-based care about this? Because it feels like the world wants us to believe that everyone is happily addicted or consuming this thing regularly, and it is nothing but joy, right? And that's what, it's even like the buddies on the school bus. It's like, what do you mean, bro? Everyone's doing this. It's totally normal. And I've heard a ton of guys that they're like really discouraged because they're like, well, for me, there was all of these reasons and I can share some of them, but it's so discouraging when all I heard from my best friends was like, dude, you're weird, right? I think something in the last 3 years has shifted, maybe post-COVID. And part of my theory is that COVID made this problem worse for a lot of people. We've seen the rise of OnlyFans. So the progression from like looking at just static images of porn, and like we talked about, like back in the day, we're talking like magazines or like DVDs or VCR, to like now I can chat with a real person. And so becoming more in like virtual infidelity is really like the whole category in the spectrum that quickly porn leads into. And people who aren't planning on cheating find themselves on, these sites where they're engaging with other human beings, and it's virtual engagement, right? So what's the problem? I mean, just going off that last point, for anyone in a relationship, you can make a really strong argument where unless your partner's like, nah, like this is super great. I feel great about you going and looking at other people and like, that makes me feel awesome. There's probably some degree of that creates a barrier anywhere from like that's deeply hurtful and feels like complete betrayal to this. It's at minimum, it just takes away from what connection and intimacy we could be having. You're choosing something else over me. So that's probably the number one thing that I have tons of guys that come into our community who I talk to who have been in a relationship for a long time, and they didn't grow up religious. They didn't grow up believing this was morally a problem. And one of the big catalysts is usually like, I realized that, and often it's not her coming to me saying, hey, I'm going to leave you. Sometimes it's that, but it's realizing like this really is like taking away from my relationship, and I want to be better than that. So that's one, is relationships. With that, like erectile dysfunction, something a lot of people think is only for old men. That is not the case. That has changed dramatically. There's a lot of research around erectile dysfunction in young men. I can't remember exactly the age, but it's like if you're exposed to pornography earlier than, I want to say it's 11 or earlier than 13, your probability of getting erectile dysfunction when you're young, like in your 20s or 30s, is like way higher. And that's something too. It's just like I actually can't have meaningful sex because of this problem. Like the brain has learned to seek more and more and more in quantity and more hardcore versions of pornography, where normal human beings, it's like takes away from being able to have intimacy. And so that's a big one for a lot of guys that feel a ton of shame around that. And that's unfortunately, it's a really normal thing. But then if it's not one of those things, a lot of single guys are like, okay, so if I'm not religious, if I'm not in a relationship, then what's the harm? What's the harm, Zuby? What's the big deal, man? And honestly, I think for a lot of guys, it's like it's stealing my time. Like I'm up till 2, 3 a.m. binging this thing every night. Like, is that really me being a real man? Like, I think leaning into the awakening we're seeing and kind of the masculinity and embracing healthy masculinity. It's like, is this really like my full potential and what I'm designed to do? It feels like maybe settling beneath, what I can live up to. So there's that angle it's personal, right? It's not like this measurable quantitative thing, but there's a time loss. There's an energy loss. I know a lot of people talk about just like feeling foggy, less clarity. What I see, man, is it just erodes a lot of these guys' sense of like purpose and how they see themselves. Like even if they don't feel like it's a big issue, it creates this cycle. I think it feeds depression, it feeds anxiety, it feeds the self-image of like, I don't feel confident talking to real women. I just feel like, I don't know, it's just like I spend all this time, by myself binging porn, and then I'm trying to go make something of myself and be somebody in the world. It just feels like incongruent, I think, for a lot of these guys, not necessarily because of faith reasons.
Yeah, you make a lot of interesting points there. I think that the thing is, I mean, you'll understand this as a Christian, but the kind of idea that, God's law and morality is written on your human heart, on the human heart regardless. So even someone who's atheistic or secular will still tend to have some sense of shame or guilt or conviction, like even if they deny it, like deep down,
right?
It's
deep down.
It's rarely something that someone is like proud of, right? Like no one is sort of coming out there like, oh wow, like I'm so look at what I did last night, like I'm so proud of this, right?
Yeah.
There's something that's like, it's bottled up, it's kept to yourself generally for a reason. And then I think just because it's something that's common, it's kind of easier to rationalize because it's like, well, most people, I don't know the stats, and it's probably impossible to get genuine stats, right? Because people aren't honest about it for the same reason I just said.
Well, the good thing you can assume is they're probably underreported. They're like, you could probably just assume it's higher than whatever you find.
Yeah, I would wager, if I were a gambling man, I would wager that over 50% of men in the West and perhaps the entire developed world, at least occasionally, have used or, used or engaged in it. That would be I would be very surprised if it were not a majority. I'd put probably quite a lot of money down on it, at least being a majority.
Yeah.
How big that majority is,
Most studies
I don't know.
agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's hard to get probably accurate data, but one stat that we've referenced before is about 252 million people consume it at least monthly. So that's people who admit to consuming it at least monthly.
That's where is that just in the USA?
In the entire world, so 252 million.
Okay, 252 million in the world.
That
I think it's higher. I think that's
probably higher.
I think that's a low ball. 8 billion people, of which I think probably at least 6 billion.
You've got
6 billion,
kids,
6 billion are adults. Okay, I guess 6 billion are adults. Half of them are women. I did have a question about women, but I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I'd wager it's closer to 1 billion, but I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, anecdotally, you can just use it's like, did you go to school or did you have friends? You can probably guess, even if this wasn't talked about. Do you have a smartphone? Yeah. Do you see the content that's on TikTok? Like, we didn't even get into, I think, a big one, Zuby. So there's an organization that puts out a lot of research, or they aggregate research around the harms of pornography, and they're called Fight the New Drug. So it's fightthenewdrug.org. Highly recommend checking them out for anyone that really wants to know the data. But one of the biggest things they talk about, I mean, there's sex trafficking, there's issues with minors. Like, a lot of these porn sites are not incentivized, and they don't even have the ability, with how much sheer volume of content is uploaded to their platform, to completely verify that everything that's being made is consensual, that it's being made with adults, that it's being made ethically, like however you define ethically. Like, and there's been a lot of people who have left the porn industry, OnlyFans, that have spoken out about like how everyone, I'm overgeneralizing, or I'm kind of citing secondhand these people's personal firsthand experiences, but what they've shared on some of these podcasts is like, everyone who's creating content in that industry is miserable. They're on drugs, right? To get through that with what that looks like, being a sex worker, is not as glamorous as some people might think, and is really damaging, right? Oftentimes. And so we didn't even get into the reasons of like, what is this doing in terms of shaping our perceptions of what healthy sex is? What is it doing for kids growing up and thinking this is what real sex is? You could be watching somebody on the screen that is not actually consenting to this, and it could be harmed, and that is not an irregular occurrence. And there's been a lot of people who have put out things to prove that. So it's really, it honestly, and I'll just speak for me, when I was caught in this, learning that stuff actually made me feel pretty bad about myself. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm contributing to this thing that, man, it's like I care about. I know that that's somebody's daughter. I know that that's somebody's sister. This is a human being. Like, I don't want to objectify her, right? And that's, I think, even more shame, I think, can get piled on when you really try to face like what, but by being a part of the consumption. You're part of an economic demand for a product, and what are you, what are you really consuming, and what is that contributing to in the world? It's hard to feel good about that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think that's one of the more sort of powerful arguments that convicts people against it, in my opinion. Like, I have spoken to people whose, their perception on it massively changed, particularly in the last few years, because as you said, there's been quite a lot of exposés on that exact topic. And I think it's made a lot of people, both men and women, be more like, oh, okay, this whole quote unquote industry is, there's a lot of dark stuff going on here, and it's not necessarily what it seems. Because again, in the West, with the sort of liberal and libertarian mindsets of just, do whatever you want with your body. If it feels good, do it. Just chase pleasure, all of these things, as long as it's consenting adults. That last point, it's like, oh, well, that one's now more up for a question.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
People
no
before
matter
didn't,
what you believe,
people before didn't really kind of, think, oh, that there was a huge amount of non-consensual stuff going on in that industry. But now I think there's just much more awareness of like, oh gosh, like what am I even feeding here, right? Like what am I supporting with my eyeballs, or, for some people with their wallet and so on. So I do know people, I have spoken to people where like that particular point is the thing that made them like, kind of feel more icky about it all, and be like, yeah, actually, you know what? I don't know if this is something I can and should support. So,
Totally.
That's interesting. I mean, it does seem over the last few years that there's been much more of a conversation around this.
Well, I remember when we started Relay, it was like, we need to make it less stigmatized. It needs to be more talked about. And honestly, like, I feel like the last 2-3 years, there has been kind of this anti-push back against, like, this isn't normal. This isn't good for our society. It's kind of stupid that we think it is, right? Like, and that's just been interesting to see. And we see it with our platform, like the number of people, and it is men and women, if we want to go there, but people showing up that are, again, not just coming because it feels like, hey, I'm religious and I feel like I'm a sinner. It's, I want to say, like I expected 90% of our users to be maybe kind of religiously influenced. It's like 60%. We asked them, like, kind of if they value a faith-based perspective or want that in their, like, approach to helping them change, and it's only like 60%, which to me feels like indicative of there's a lot of reasons that people are waking up to this.
Yeah. How much of a problem is this amongst women?
Yeah, it's increasing for sure.
Yeah, as a percentage, it's increasing.
Bring the data, but as a percentage, it's 100% increasing. And I think that part of the problem is, I think even parents are still looking at this from a lens of, it's a boy's issue, it's a man's issue, and I think the way that girls are getting lured in is often different than the way that guys are getting lured in. It may not be the for a lot of guys, it's the bikini pictures on Instagram or everywhere you look, right? That's like just this lull into more. But yeah, there's been a huge uptick in women, and I know that they feel a lot of shame often. So we do have women's groups in our platform, in our community, and just have talked to a lot of them and heard their stories of like feeling like they were the only ones, feeling like they only heard that this was a guy's issue. And just feeling like totally broken because of it. And it's sad because I think, so from a clinical perspective, we believe that really people don't have a porn problem. What they actually have is a pain problem. So beneath the behavior, there's a reason that we keep turning to that, even if it's against your values or your integrity. And it's really to help solve some sort of problem. The brain wants to escape discomfort and to meet that emotional need. So usually it's to feel loved. It's like, I want to feel more seen, loved, soothed. Like as babies, we want to be, soothed by our caregivers. We learn that from a very early age. That's part of secure attachment in relationships. And so I think for women especially, right, as I go growing up and maybe I don't get my needs fully met in my home from my parents or in my peer group, in my relationships, they're also susceptible emotionally, to learning how to cope and deal with emotions. And so just as accessibility has grown among different types of porn, I think that's why we're seeing more women, turn there. It's not because there's not something inherently different about women. It's because we're human beings, and this is just one thing that we've learned can help medicate or self-medicate, for the most part, like something within us.
You mentioned that the way women are falling into that rabbit hole is different from the way men typically are. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the rise of the AI boyfriend and girlfriend stuff, and I had a conversation recently with somebody who she was doing some research into this, and like I don't know the exact numbers, but the popularity of like the connecting and building a relationship with an AI has been extremely popular among women, especially. Definitely not exclusively among women, but I think that like that's an inroad that I see becoming more common. Is I'm not going directly to search up images, or like these women may not be the most common entry point. I know a lot of people talk about like smut or like book like literature that's like essentially like written pornography. So there's definitely like that whole category, but I think that's really bleeding into the AI nature of it. Like I talked about, these apps are literally doing that. Instead of it being a book on your Kindle, it's like they're just feeding you scenarios and narratives where you're like romanticizing with this fake character, and it quickly leads into like stimulating the same feelings and emotions that porn does. And so I think that's one of the biggest dangers for women especially, but of course for everybody.
It's interesting. I mean, something that we haven't touched on, although should be an obvious point, is the fact that part of the reason, I mean, huge reason why porn usage is so common and can become so habitual is because it is hijacking something that is in its proper context, is a totally normal, natural, healthy, and good human impulse and desire, which is the impulse to mate and to procreate and to have, a sexual relationship, which ultimately drives reproduction. Every single person who exists, both of us here, everyone who is listening to this podcast, we all exist because that drive exists. And so I think what is so messed up in a way, there's a lot of things that are messed up, but it's like, it's like gluttony, right? It's like these people who are eating themselves to death and they're 400, 500, 600, 800 pounds, right? Like the desire to eat is not something that's sort of inherently...
It's a normal thing.
Yeah, it's good. Like you need it. Without food, there's no survival, right? But without sex, there's no survival, right? You can survive as an individual, but as a species, not even just humans, every single species of animal, without that, like they would perish over time.
We're dead. Yeah.
We're dead within what, like a century? So it hijacks that limbic system, and it's like it's like a messed up, bastardized, fake version of something that is real and something that is good and something that is necessary and healthy, but it's just like being
it's being perverted or hijacked.
It's being perverted, and it's being kind of scattered all over the place, even in this like digital realm, rather than that energy and that focus and that effort being channeled into the real world and forming a healthy relationship and everything that comes with that.
Totally. I'm so glad you brought this up, because it's a huge truth. I think that sexuality is a good thing, and it's hard for me to not get spiritual about this, but I believe that it's a God-given thing that's designed to be beautiful and connective, and it's a central part of our existence, and for procreation, but also for joy, and that has always been a core part of what makes families, right, and marriage. This sacred thing, this idea of mating with one mate and committing as humans. So that's been the norm. And I believe that we're designed that way, that is a very fulfilling way to live life. That's my value system. But I think you're right that just inherently you can't argue that biologically it's a normal desire, it's a healthy desire, that we like our brains are trying to get it through a screen. It almost sounds silly if you imagine a monkey trying to mate with a computer. Don't picture that in your head, but like it's like that's like, of course it's like not normal, but So a lot of the psychologists we work with, they talk about this as like, it's really a bid for connection. It's like, I'm turning to porn because I want connection. Yeah, it could be the physical aspect of that connection, but it's intimacy is usually defined as not just physical sex. It's this holistic, closeness, right, and connectedness. And I'm making a bid for that, but I'm just getting this false signal back. And in my brain, it is trying to meet some need. The limbic system's working hard to survive and to continue to keep me going in the direction of survival, but it's not the real thing.
Yeah. It's tricky because, I'm not a psychologist, but based on just all the things I've done in my career over the past few decades and the hundreds of thousands, online millions, but in the real world, hundreds of thousands of people I've interacted with, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of human nature. And one of my sort of like basic tenets, let me say, to just like understand human beings and their behaviors, one of them is obviously just like incentives. Incentives explain most human behaviors. But another one is also just that in most cases, in most things, the majority of people will take the path of least resistance. So if something, this is where the accessibility part comes in, right? So if something is just, you were talking before about the difficulties and the challenges of a relationship, let alone a marriage, let alone building and maintaining a family and all things that, billions of people do successfully, but billions of people also fail at and always have done. It's not easy. It's challenging. You have to be extremely patient and empathetic and kind and all of these things, which just kind of by our default nature, we're not 100% at the time. And so most people are going to take the path of least resistance. It's the same reason why there are far fewer people that work out than people that don't work out. There are far fewer people that eat a healthy, nutritious diet than people who don't, because most will take the path of least resistance, right? Like, why is the majority of the American population overweight or obese? Because it's much easier. Like, it's much easier to just eat whatever tastes good and is available and easily accessible, and it's fast, especially if you're busy. It's easier to just do that. It's easier not to go to the gym than it is to go to the gym. It's easier to like not read books than it is to read books. It's easier not like, so people just take the path of least resistance. So when you make technologies and you make devices and you make things that make it so easy and so accessible, and then you alter society and culture to make it sort of be perceived to be more morally acceptable and less shameful, then it's like, whoa, lo and behold, you're going to get an enormous number of people who do this thing. It's not exactly rocket science to me. It's like, well,
yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, obviously this is where we are. Yeah.
Yeah, and that to me too is part of like you could look at through a critical eye all of the reasons and the arguments to not consume pornography, but the argument you just made of like, am I somebody that almost like a herd animal? I just naturally go with the path of least resistance in all of my behaviors and in every category of my life, or am I leading out of values, vision, goals, desire, right? And not trying to push any sort of like perfectionism mindset on anybody, but I think most people also have a desire to be their best self, whatever that looks like, and that can look different ways. But like often this idea of just going with the path of least resistance isn't aligned with me becoming my best self. Like to go to the gym and gain muscle, I need resistance. Sitting on the couch doesn't build muscle, and that's true for most things, and I think applicable to what you're saying.
Yeah. Are you worried about the future, given what's going on with technology and perhaps even culture?
Part of me is definitely worried. Like it's concerning to see the people who maybe have disproportionate influence, whether it's the CEOs of these companies or political figures, or just people with platforms, right, advocating to continue to keep society moving down a path that, I think puts us in this rat cage of just least resistance that isn't good for most people. I I'm actually less worried than before. This is something I've been sharing kind of privately with people I know, that when they ask about my work and how things are going, I'm like, I'm actually kind of encouraged right now. They're like, what do you mean? Like with the announcement from ChatGPT and, everything you see going on in the world, not just with, pornographic content, but violence and everything. I'm encouraged because we talked about this a little bit. I think people are waking up and they're realizing I don't just want to, have my brain sucked out of me by any of these sources, right? I don't just believe, that whether it's moving down this path of divisiveness, right, of political rhetoric, like that doesn't seem like the way we need to go. We need to seek unification as a society, as a humanity. Whether it's like vaping or porn, like I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha are actually kind of going through this awakening of it's less normal, or like it's just as common, if not more common. I think we're going to see more of kind of this radical authenticity that we've seen show up in different areas, show up in the form of people that are essentially leading or influencing from a place of like, this is actually stupid. Like, we can be better. And I think we're going to see more and more of that authenticity. And we're already seeing that in different spheres from younger and younger people. And I think I'm encouraged, and also even just people who have spoken out against pornography. By the time this episode comes out, it may have already passed. But for the month of November, we're organizing this initiative, this movement of trying to get 1 million people committed to go porn-free for the month of November. And we have a bunch of organizations on board, and we've actually reached out to a ton of creators and influencers across different platforms, so across X and Instagram and YouTube, and people who don't necessarily talk about this stuff often, but it's like, I think they would resonate with this. And dude, I've been surprised at how positive the reception's been of like, I totally can get behind this. I think a lot of people in my audience will get behind this. And so even just seeing more people being willing to talk about, and say, hey, not necessarily trying to create this like porn is bad campaign, but like speaking to the individual. Like, if this is something that you feel like is creating a weight on you and keeping you back from who you want to be in your life, that's normal, and there's a way out. There's a better path out. And if we believe that social media and big tech knows how to weaponize our eyeballs to generate profits, like they know how to keep our attention in order to like keep these ad businesses massive, it's not a far stretch to believe that the porn industry has an intentional strategy, that it's not a coincidence that kids younger and younger are getting hooked into it because they want customers for life. It's designed, whether you believe it's an addiction or not, it's designed to be addictive, in the same way you could argue that TikTok or Instagram or whatever is designed to be addictive and to capture and hijack that dopamine system. And so I think we're seeing more and more people waking up to that and realizing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. Now, Chandler, I know you're not a political advocate necessarily, right? But I do see these conversations floating about. So I'm curious to know your opinion, given that you are the co-founder of Relay. Do you think it should be banned?
Been thinking about this. It's like my late night thoughts of like, if I had to take a stance on this. I don't know that I would advocate there, because what I believe is that the access is so widespread. I don't know how if you banned it, how you could actually reduce the supply of what's out there. Like, I don't even know if you got Google or you forced all of the big tech companies to help essentially take down or undo the supply. I don't even know if it's possible to eradicate all of these sources, or like maybe you could make a dent in like a third of it. I'm skeptical you could make a dent in half of it. We're talking about taking down billions of web pages and billions of videos. Maybe trillions. I don't know, man. Like it's an absurd amount of content across an absurd amount of places. So what I'm skeptical of, I think we've seen this, right, with when alcohol was abolished, right? It's like if people will still find a way to go get it. People will find a way to access it. So I mean, my passion, obviously, why I'm doing Relay is I believe that the inverse has more influenceability of stopping the demand, of helping people wake up and being empowered to make a change, rather than relying on regulation to do that. but I still think that there's certain things of regulation that are important. So there's 16 states, I believe, that have enforced some degree of age verification, where if you actually try to go to certain pornographic sites, it requires you to upload a real ID. So part of that push, as I see it, is really trying to prevent this widespread exposure that's happening with minors, right? When their brains are still forming, like how could we at least stop that? Is there some
do you know what's
ability
very
there?
do you know what's very suspicious to me? Is
What?
the people who are vehemently against that.
Yeah.
That's
for sure.
Yeah, that's really sus to me. When I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, like I can understand, you know, like there's a lot of positions. If you're talking like a full on ban for what I get, that's very complicated, right? But if someone is like, hey, we're going to put in this measure so that under 18s can't access it or can't access it as easily, and someone is like viciously against that,
Nah.
I'm a bit like, what are you up to, bro? Like,
It is.
what's going on
Yeah.
there?
Like what's your incentive there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's hard to make an argument like, no, that's a good thing. It's like, you know, every teen needs that. Like the only argument I've heard for that is like, well, it helps teach more people about sex. But again, Fight the New Drug has like
that's a terrible,
insane
that's a
amounts
terrible-
of research of
that's a
like,
terrible
this
argument.
is terrible education. It's not good, not real. Yeah, man. I'm definitely pro like, how do we make it to where parents can be supported by the norm, whatever the norm is, if that's coming from a regulatory standpoint or companies of their own, you know, out of a place of integrity and ethics, choosing to help do the right thing and make it, you know, difficult or less normal for under 18 to be exposed to this. But again, it's still, how do you even draw the line? Again, for me, it wasn't going to Pornhub. It was like being lulled on Instagram, and people continue to find ways around. And Instagram has gotten better at like automatically detecting and like hiding and banning the stuff that is pornographic. But people who create the stuff are getting more creative at how they lure you in, right? It's maybe not pornography, but they know how to hook you emotionally and create links out to other sites. And so it's like, yeah, I don't know. I think we have to systemically help make it better or like create different. I don't know, man. It's just very complex.
Yeah,
but it's important.
I agree with you. It's very complicated. And you know, I think with like with many things, people want to pretend that there's a very simple answer, right? Like if someone is like, you know,
Right.
Christian and conservative, it's easy to kind of do the virtue signal of just like, you know, ban porn and, you know, you'll go viral and, you know, thousands of people will like your posts, but, you know, just constantly tweeting out, you know, just ban porn. It doesn't.
Oh, I see those all the time.
Yeah.
Ban
Yeah.
porn, ban
Like
porn.
it's a great way to get likes, but it doesn't do anything. Number one, that's not like a policy, right? You'd even at least need to like go into the political sphere and really push that. But I don't know. There's also just that constant battle between culture and law, right? You know, it's not as simple as you just make a policy and all of a sudden this thing that has been out there to as ubiquitous as it is, like it suddenly all just vaporizes and disappears. Like that's not how it works. At the same time, I do understand the concept that morality informs laws, but laws can also inform morality. So if something is like legal and accessible and all over the place and unrestricted, then a lot of people naturally kind of default
Assume
to,
that it's
well,
okay.
yeah, assume that it's okay, right? It's kind of like, well, okay, well, it can't be that bad. Like it's all over the place and there's no restrictions. So I understand that part as well. I just think that over the last 60 years in particular in the West, like particularly from the 60s onwards, like we've all just kind of grown up in this weird libertine soup where it's kind of like, you know, just do whatever you do as long as it isn't directly
Whatever feels good.
harming someone else. Yeah. Yep. And it feels good. Consenting adults, and everything's just kind of like consent only morality. And that's the only thing that matters. And consent is very important. But I would argue there are more elements to morality than simply something being consensual, right? Something could be consensual but still be very bad for yourself or for other people or for society as a whole. But where do you draw those lines? You know, that's the age-old question. It's not a, it's not so simple. You want to live in a free society. Most people do want to have, you know, elements of freedom and liberty, but you also don't want to live in complete chaos. And you certainly want to protect children from some of these adult things, right? So I don't think most people would argue that alcohol should be legalized for children or smoking should be legalized for children. Yeah. Most people understand, no, those are adult activities, and sure, they might be harmful, particularly in excess, but you should be allowed to do them if you so choose. And, you know, this is one of those ones where it's like, where does it fall? You know, it's, I don't know the answers. Right. I know the answer morally, I believe, but I don't know in terms of like the sort of practical, pragmatic, day-to-day, and then scaling this to hundreds of millions or billions of people. I don't know.
Well, and so I think like with smoking, with more education, people become more empowered to make it less normal, and rates have decreased, right?
They did also regulate a lot.
I think that's the same.
They did regulate a lot. Right?
There probably is a relationship there.
Smoking advertising used to be all over the place. Even when I was a kid, man, you could smoke on a plane when I was a little kid. You could smoke everywhere.
You could argue that all
Yeah.
I just, as you were saying that, I'm like, you could argue that basically all of social media is just an advertisement for pornography, or a lot of it. And that's what makes it difficult, though, because it's organic content often, that not paid ads. But yeah, I don't know. I'm hopeful that we're at the cusp of this trend, of people that are empowered to choose. And really the passion behind Relay and the vision is there isn't a mainstream option for people that do feel stuck. How do you help make it easier for them to change? Especially, again, you don't have to be a rocket science to like believe that it's a difficult vice to overcome. It's not an easy one. And anecdotally, we have people show up in our community all the time that are like, I kicked alcohol, I kicked this, I kicked that. This thing is damn difficult. Like, this is so hard. And I hear that all the time. And again, these are just like, I'm hearing people's stories, but I'm like, dude, it makes sense. Again, it's everywhere. It's wired in our DNA. We're like looking for that like need. And it's not just I need a sexual release. It's like I need connection. I need to like survive as a species. So there's like this deep element to it, and it's very nuanced. But how do we empower people who want to change to not just like have to somehow white knuckle it and be Superman, right? And never look, because it's impossible to avoid exposure, I think, to varying degrees. You can cut social media, and that's a lot of people do that, and other things to make it easier for themselves to kind of, you know, cleanse and to work on whatever they need to work on to become healthier and to change whatever the habit is. And I think what we can do is make it easier for people, make it more normal, and encourage that.
Amen. Chandler, man, it's been awesome talking to you. I think that the work you're doing is important, and I hope you continue to raise awareness and help people with this. Before we close out, where can people find and follow you online? Where do you want to direct people?
Go to our website for anyone that wants to learn more about Relay. That's joinrelay.app, joinrelay.app. We're also on Instagram at joinrelay. So yeah, I mean, my message is just anyone out there, whether it's you personally or someone you love, there's a ton of hope. This doesn't have to be a heavy subject. There's tons of people making change, and you're not alone.
Awesome. Chandler, thanks for the gift of your time and for your wisdom. I appreciate it.
Thank you.